Welcome. Today we are going to be talking about day 2 of Donna Adelson's trial. She's on trial for the murder of Dan Markel, her ex-son-in-law. He was killed all the way back in 2014. She is on trial for murder, solicitation to murder, and conspiracy to murder. Her son, Charlie, already convicted. And the woman who had been married to Dan Markel, Donna's daughter, testified today. She's not on trial and she hasn't been charged. 3 other people are already serving prison time. Katie McBanawa, who was Charlie, the son's girlfriend, she hired the hitman, according to the jury that convicted her. She hired Sigfredo Garcia, her ex, and his friend Luis Rivera. And all of them killed the man you see on the left, Dan Markel. Now we've got Donna Adelson, the matriarch of the family, the mother of Charlie, and the mother of Wendi, who had been married to Dan Markel. Dan Markel was a law professor at FSU. He and Wendi had 2 children together, and they were in a very bitter battle over custody of the children. Donna wanted the kids to be able to move down to Miami, nearer her, where she could spend a lot of time with them. Dan Markel said, "No, I work in Tallahassee. We're not going down to South Florida." That is among the most important reason as to why Dan Markel was killed, according to the prosecution theory. It was really, to me, surprising how much additional evidence there was related to Donna and her feelings about Dan Markel. The state says she hated Dan Markel. And frankly, the new emails and the new evidence that came in today really did support a lot of what the state said. Donna read in detail the pleadings that were being filed in Wendy's divorce case with Dan Markel and the custody dispute. She even made changes on them, suggested things that should be said, arguments that should be made. She was deeply involved. She wasn't just a passive watcher hearing about things that were happening. She was intimately involved with what exactly should be said. We'd heard before that the most important part of the entire divorce proceeding was that Wendi be allowed to relocate, that it was non-negotiable and Wendi needed to win on that. Spoiler alert, the court ruled against her and said, no, I'm not going to let you move the kids away from the place where they live and where their father lives. Donna called Dan Markel a religious zealot and suggested that he was pretending to be an attentive father when he really wasn't. She also said that bastard has not paid 1 cent toward an amount he owed to Wendi. Called him a royal jackass and said, how smart are you to get rid of this piece of, and used a more descriptive term there. Donna also wrote in an email to a friend that at the moment she, Wendi, will not be allowed to relocate. I am beyond angry. This, however, was a year before Dan Markel was killed. Donna also wrote to Wendi, and we heard about this one in Charlie's case. She talked about how the entire family was being affected. And you can be a great actress, Wendi, get in there and convince Jibbers, that was their name for him, convince Jibbers that that you are going to do things with the boys if he won't let them relocate, such as baptize them, such as take them to a Sunday school for Christian Sunday school, knowing that both Wendi and Dan were Jewish. And she even mentioned dressing them up as Nazis in Nazi uniforms. If you have to do that, I'll support it, she said. It's the performance of your life, she told Wendi. Aggravate him, meaning aggravate Danny as he's aggravated you. She said she didn't want Danny to have religious control over the boys because she thought he was way off base, way too out there on that. And she said, something has to be done with this blank. Love, mom and dad. It was such an odd contradiction between those two, juxtaposition of the two things. Cross-examination was very effective, and there was a lot of new information. On cross, they tried to once again go into that distinction that these emails are coming from Donna Harvey, and that maybe people don't really know. Is it Donna or is it Harvey? Maybe Donna's on trial now, and maybe it wasn't Donna who wrote this. Maybe it was Harvey. And they argued that Donna specifically has a lengthier style. She tends to say a lot of things. And one of the emails was just, wow. But That's a technical argument. I think it's not a very effective argument with the jury. We then got Wendi Adelson on the stand, which was a huge moment when she testified in her brother Charlie Adelson's trial. It was dramatic because Charlie Adelson was her brother and he was on trial for murder of her ex-husband. That alone was dramatic. But now Wendi is testifying against her own mother. Super dramatic. The direct examination from the state talked about the fact that she didn't like to live in Tallahassee, that she had really referred to it as being stuck in Tallahassee, that she was claustrophobic because she had to stay in Tallahassee. And the argument that has been made by the state is Wendi wanted out, and Donna wanted Wendi out. Wendi said, I think my mom saw it as best for me not to be in Tallahassee. She's called me a hostage, a prisoner, and a prisoner in Tallahassee. Those were all quotes. She was asked, do you think your mom or your dad was more the dominant force in your family? And she said, my mom. That was going to be echoed by Rob Adelson, who will testify next. Wendi immediately told the police right after they hauled her in for an interview, pulled her out of a restaurant where she was eating with friends to tell her Dan Markel had been shot and to interview her. And she told them that my parents had more reason to dislike Danny than anyone. And she said, yes, I said that after sitting with law enforcement for 6 hours. Wendi is a very polished witness. I think she was a less polished witness today than she has been at the other trials, but she's an attorney and she's a very good witness. She was asked, was she angry with Dan Markel? And she said, at certain points, I was very frustrated with him. So not a direct answer, but pretty much implying that she was, but that she was moving on and had gotten over it. They went through some of the things that Wendi had called Dan Markel, such as the Dark Lord. She compared him to an STD, called him gibbers. It's always been unclear. What is that? She always says, oh, that's a silly name that we came up with to make him feel less scary. But this time she said that a friend helped her come up with. She didn't name the friend. And the question from the prosecution was, could that have meant gibbers, Jew in boots, J-I-B, Jew in boots, which I didn't understand. I don't know if that's like an insult, but maybe one of you knows. If you do, please put that in the chat. I didn't understand that. They also had quotes, I hate him in this moment, and I hate that I hate my children's dad. She said that back in 2013, more than a year before Dan Markel was shot. She referred to him as an emotional terrorist. One of the things that the prosecution has done very effectively this time, different from what they did in Charlie's case, is they went in detail through those divorce pleadings and they had them ready to go to cross-examine Wendi with things that she or her attorneys had stated in the course of those pleadings. It was very effective. And she also made the statement, I hate him. And bizarrely, apparently, Donna pretended to be Wendi and contacted financial institutions on Wendi's behalf. And Wendi said she did do that, but maybe it was some special account that they set up that she had some interest in or control over. But that is definitely next level controlling for an adult to have their mother contact financial institutions on their behalf, pretending to be you. Donna also referred to herself as Wendi's South Florida legal team, again, suggesting she was heavily involved in everything that Wendi was doing with the divorce. The state is really pushing the idea that even after a judge said to Wendi, you cannot relocate, and I'm ordering this with prejudice. You can't relocate. You can't take the boys to South Florida. No. And even after that, Donna just kept pushing. She would not let it go. In fact, her most extreme ideas came at that point when she said things, let's pretend the boys have become Christian. I'll pay for them to go to a Christian summer camp and we could baptize them, and implored her to be a good actress, put on a good act here, even Googled how to teach acting, and offered or came up with the idea to offer Dan Markel $1 million if he would just agree to relocate down to the area where Donna and Harvey lived in South Florida. All that came to naught, and that was never actually offered to Dan. She even made the infamous suggestion about dressing the kids in Hitler uniforms if that's what it took to persuade Dan Markel. The prosecution did a great job going through these documents and pulling out the word control and popping it out yellow in red type over and over again. Donna talked about taking away Dan's control. And the state's thesis, of course, is that Donna's the one who's the control freak. She wanted you, says the prosecutor to Wendi, she wanted you to aggravate Dan. Yes. To screw him financially. Yes. And to get a win. Yes. Then in March of 2014, just 4 months before Dan was killed, he filed what the prosecution called the grandma motion, where he said, Donna is trying to alienate my kids' affections from me. I don't want Donna having unsupervised visitation with them. And they went the hitman joke, where always it has been just puzzling and confusing about why Wendi gets pulled out of her lunch, brought down to the police station, and immediately tells him, yeah, my brother made a joke about hiring a hitman, but a TV was cheaper, so he bought me that instead. And she just volunteered that. And she volunteered that her mother and her father had every reason to dislike Dan Markel. All of this is going to be extremely important when we get to the cross-examination by the defense. Went through the fact that Charlie didn't like Dan Markel, that ever since they'd been broken up. Last time the state interrogated her really intensely, got more argumentative when they examined Wendi and Charlie Adelson's trial. We went through Wendi's trip toward Trescott Drive. That's one of the things that really connects Wendi to the murder of Dan Markel. Shortly after he was shot, she headed down the road where he lived, where she used to live. She said, I was going to a liquor store near there, but it was not the liquor store that was closest to her. None of that was brought up by the prosecution. However, it was brought up in Charlie's trial, wasn't brought up here. They really, throughout this trial, seemed to be pulling back. They were not pushing hard on Wendi compared to what they did in Charlie's trial. They were not pushing hard on Wendi being involved. They're pushing hard on Donna being involved. The kid's name change. The older son, she changed his middle and last name from Markel to Adelson. The younger son, just the last name to Adelson. In Charlie's trial, they went into a great deal of detail of that. Here, they just mentioned it casually and moved on. But one of the things that just was show-stopping, I think, is that neither she nor the children attended Dan Markel's funeral. That is shocking to me. Even if she herself didn't want to attend, I'm just surprised she didn't at least take the kids up to be with the family. If they were too young to actually go to the funeral, maybe they could at least be comforting and happy for the family. I remember having my grandchild at my husband's funeral. That was really comforting to have little people there, little lives. Anyway, I'm just really surprised at that. All right. My little rant aside, I was horrified. I've been wondering, when was the last time she saw Donna? When she walks in that courtroom and sees her, how big of a shock is this? Well, she last spoke to her on November 2023. Long time, nearly 2 years now, that she has not seen or spoken to her mother. And she said that her mother had hoped I would be supportive of my brother at the trial, and afterwards was completely devastated and felt that Wendi had not been supportive enough of Charlie. At the interview, when she was interviewed right after the death of Dan Markel, in addition to saying Charlie told this joke and my mom and dad have a lot of reason to dislike Dan Markel, she also mentions I should call my parents. I need to let them know this is going on. And so she called her mom and said, okay, I need you to sit down. I'm going to tell you some news. And then talked through it with her mom and her dad. And then afterwards hangs up and says, well, my mom handled that pretty well. And said, my parents sounded really surprised. At least that's a relief. So I may not have that exact quote right, but pretty close, implying that it was a relief to her that they were surprised because it had occurred to her maybe they were the ones who did it or arranged it. Then we got into cross-examination. And what was a huge surprise here is that Donna was throwing Wendi under the bus. I had assumed that Donna would try to protect Wendi and would continue to try to protect Wendi. That is not what happened here. They also put up the picture of Wendi Adelson in the center, Katie on the left, and another friend on the right, and said, there you are with Katie. You've said you didn't really know Katie that well. You've said Katie was Charlie's friend. You didn't really know her, but here you are at the beach with her, and Charlie's not with you, and your mom's not with you. It's just you and Katie and a friend hanging out. They were insinuating you could have hired Katie. And when Katie comes and testifies, her testimony is such a complete wreck that it's very easy to say to the jury, look, she lied 5 times, 6 times. It's all of these things were lies. And so lied saying she talked to Charlie versus lied saying she talked to Wendi, it could go either way because you're not going to be able to tell directly from what she said. I believe they're setting up the narrative that Wendi could have been the person who hired and got Katie to do this. Maybe not even Charlie was involved, but definitely not Donna. It was Wendi who arranged the murder of Dan Markel. They went into what a great mom and grandmother that Donna had been, although that could cut either way because also that supports the prosecution theory that she was obsessed with the grandchildren. They also went again into pumping up Dan Markel, a great guy, intelligent. They talked about that motion that the state has called the grandma motion. It did have a part in there about Donna alienating the grandchildren's affections, but it also was mostly and primarily about Wendi and a motion about her being held in contempt, about sanctions. And at no point did it mention unsupervised visitation, and her mother didn't see it. There was also a really important point, I thought, about the TV, because we had heard, I understood from Charlie's trial, that Donna had called and made the appointment for Wendi to have the TV repaired. The state had leaned into that, saying the reason for that was because Donna wanted to make sure that Wendi had an alibi for the period of time when somebody was going to be shooting Dan Markel, and having somebody come to your house to repair the TV would suit. But actually, the notation showed the father made the appointment for the TV repair, Harvey, not Donna. And on that form, it said, would you accept a sooner appointment? Answer, yes. So they're saying this is not how you set up an alibi. You don't agree to do it at a different time if the whole purpose of this is your alibi. There was a question to Wendi, and it never really got pinned down. In April, they said, you took a trip with Miguel to Puerto Rico and you went to a law professor conference. And she said, yes. And who's Miguel? At that time, I thought she was dating Jeffrey Lacrosse, who said he thought she was cheating on him. She has adamantly said, I was not cheating on Jeffrey Lacrosse. But I don't know who Miguel is. Maybe we'll hear when Jeffrey Lacrosse takes a stand. She also wrote to somebody named Renee that on her way back from this conference, talking about how she wanted to be living life, she said she was realizing she wanted to keep her job, that she didn't want to live in Tallahassee before, but actually it was kind of growing on her. Maybe she really did want to stay in Tallahassee. Maybe that was really the best idea. She even said she didn't want to confront her mother after all, for the chance to save face with my family and be given the opportunity to live with my family, which I don't want. So she was rethinking it, but rather than actually just saying that to Donna and to Harvey, she instead kept them out of there in the hearing, agreed to it, and then came out and said, oh, the judge did that. And had no idea. Can't believe it. Won't let me relocate. The text of what the judge had signed said the judge was granting the motion to prevent Wendi from relocating because it was stipulated. That means both parties agreed. So Wendi agreed not to be relocating. The defense argument was those really extreme things that Donna said, you dress up the boys in Nazi uniforms, that was all done after she was told that the judge had denied relocation, but Donna thought it was still ongoing. There was still a chance. So the prosecution suggestion that Donna just kept pushing despite the fact that the judge had clearly and plainly ruled Doesn't make sense. And the last question, it's like, I played it back for our group watching during the trial. The defense lawyer for Donna Adelson, Jackie Fulford, got animated and said, look, your boys lost their father with his influence and his advice. He was removed from their lives, something the prosecution argued a great deal at Charlie's trial. And you said that anybody in your family should be held accountable if they were responsible for that, didn't you? And she did. And that includes you. And then they sat down. It was dramatic, powerful, and they clearly have pointed the jury to Wendi as the person who orchestrated the murder of Dan Markel. Maybe Charlie, but not Donna. It's really the very best defense they possibly could have done, I think. Is it going to win? There is tons and tons more evidence. Wendi is not the only evidence. But so what it may have done is throw Wendi under the bus, but for not a lot of gain for Donna, because there still is a lot of evidence. It's a very uphill battle here. Now, nothing Wendi said here can be used against her if she's charged. She is given use immunity and derivative use immunity because she came under state subpoena. It was a really effective cross-examination that pointed the finger at Wendi. It was Donna versus Wendi today. The next witness was Rob Adelson. So it was a double whammy for Donna. 2 of her children testified in a row against her. We are also expecting Charlie. He's been brought down from the prison where he has been moved in South Dakota. The judge gave an instruction to him at the beginning saying, you cannot give an opinion about your mother or your brother committing a crime as to whether you believe it or you think it. And the reason for that is this is reserved for the jury. What any one witness thinks about it is not really relevant. The jury, looking at all the evidence, has to put it together. He said that he believed his mother was controlling and assertive, a very involved parent, that his dad was a lot more passive, and that his mother had very rigid ideas of what she wanted for them. She said that in 2014, when Dan Markel was murdered, Donna Adelson hated Dan Markel. That Donna even used her own maiden name to rent an apartment for Wendi so that Wendi could get out without there being any notice that she was trying to rent an apartment in the area. And then Wendi and the boys moved over there. She told Rob Adelson, her son, about this plan they had. Dan was about to give a very big, very important speech at a conference, and they were going to call him right before it happened, and Wendi was going to drop the news on him that she was getting a divorce. And that is, in fact, what happened. That's exactly how Dan found out about the fact that Wendi was seeking a divorce. And according to Rob Adelson, Donna's son, Donna sounded pleased about that. She seemed to think that was great. That was just a great thing to do, just to really devastate him in this really brutal way at a time that was super important for his career. She wanted the kids near them, wanted the kids to relocate. He talked about sort of a comparison between what his mother cared about and what Charlie cared about. His mother, deeply involved in their lives, absolutely everything about their lives, the kids' lives, was important to her. Charlie, on the other hand, what does Charlie care about? Go-karts, jet skis, boats, and not Wendi's divorce. The state is really leaning into the idea that even if Charlie was involved and maybe was the conduit, he was doing it for his mother. He didn't really have any reason to do it, except that Donna desperately wanted it. Wendi suddenly wrote him, hey, went somewhere with Jeff. And he was like, who's Jeff? And she said, my boyfriend. And sent a photo of Jeff with her boys. Then, when he was interviewed, he told the FBI that Wendi had a boyfriend. Now, why would this be relevant? Jeffrey Lacoste felt like Wendi was setting him up to take the fall, that she was trying to make sure he was in town at the time that Dan Markel was murdered, that she was stringing him along even though she was dating other people at the same time. He said at the 70th birthday, he was never told that it was a surprise party, and he was never told that they were all chipping in on a big gift. Instead, he was told that We just want all the kids to be here. That's the important part. So that would undermine the story the defense team, or at least Charlie, told about it. He said he heard about the news about Dan Markel when he was at a meeting in Chicago. He got this text from Donna that said, "Tragedy here, please call." He stepped out, called her, and she was not crying. She was very matter of fact as she told him that Dan Markel had been shot, that he had not made it. She said someone knocked on his door and asked, "Are you Dan Markel?" and then shot him. There was an implication of that. It wasn't random. It wasn't a robbery gone wrong. They asked, "Are you Dan Markel?" and then shot him. And of course, how would anyone know that the killer asked, "Are you Dan Markel?" How would Donna Adelson know that? How would anyone know that? Because unless they actually are interviewing the person who did the shooting, the person who was shot can't say. Donna Adelson said, "Don't talk to law enforcement." And he said, "Well, I already did. The FBI came by and I talked to them." And she said, "Well, you didn't know anything anyway," which he thought was odd. Even though he wasn't allowed to tell the jury that he believed that she was involved, that Charlie was involved, I think the jury will clearly get the message that that's what he thinks. Donna was not at all curious, he said, about who had killed Dan Markel. In fact, no one seemed curious about it. Donna Adelson said, "I don't know and I don't care. It doesn't concern me." That Sigfredo and Luis Rivera were arrested, and he was like, "Oh my gosh, this is huge. My parents will call me." And they didn't call. They just happened to be talking for some other reason a couple of days later, and he mentioned it 2 or 3 times, and nobody responded. And when he brought it up the last time, Donna Adelson just said, "I've got to go." On cross-examination, they had pretty much nada. They just said, "Isn't it true that you know this family friend who's a lawyer?" and said, "Don't talk to police." He said, "Yeah." Then next witness, Officer Brannon with the Tallahassee Police Department, told the tale of Wendi driving up to Trescott Drive, where Dan Markel's house was, where he lived and where Wendi had lived before she moved out abruptly. The vehicle approached and then, with very little hesitation, turned around and went out. The prosecution believes this was Wendi stopping by to check to see whether or not anybody had found out that Dan Markel had been murdered. He'd been told that the spouse drove a maroon Honda Odyssey, or some maroon Honda Odyssey, and Wendi admits she was actually driving down that road. The prosecution didn't ask Wendi a lot of questions about this, but they believe that she was driving out of her way to a liquor store she didn't have to go to. She could have gone to a much closer one, and taking that route because she wanted to see whether he had been killed yet and whether anybody had found out. The date was huge. It was surprising. My mind was truly blown by that defense twist. They suggest Wendi was the mastermind and that she was setting up at least Donna, but maybe Charlie too. It doesn't mean that she doesn't get convicted, but it means that you have to reevaluate each bit of the evidence in light of that new argument. Okay, does this still make sense? Does that still make sense now that I understand the new argument? Please do leave your DNA on the like button. I would really appreciate that. If you're not subscribed, we would love to have you back for more. Please join me tomorrow. We are having such a good time watching this trial together. It is absolutely fascinating and insane, even more insane than I had expected. I will look forward to seeing you all tomorrow.